The hospital room was too white, too quiet, and too cold for a 13-year-old girl who still believed her parents would never let go of her hand. The beeping machines sounded like a countdown, each second reminding me that something in my life was about to end, even if I didn't know what it was yet. My legs dangled off the edge of the bed, wrapped in a thin blanket that smelled like disinfectant and fear. My mother stood near the door, her purse clutched tightly against her chest, as if she were already preparing to leave. My father didn't look at me at all. His eyes were fixed on the floor, studying the tiles like they held answers he didn't want to say out loud. The doctor said the treatment could take months. My father finally said, his voice low and careful, "And the bills will keep coming." My mother replied quickly. She didn't sound worried. She sounded decided. I tried to speak, but my throat burned. "I'll get better." I whispered, "I promise." My mother turned toward me, but her eyes didn't soften. "You don't understand how hard this is," she said, as if I were the one abandoning them. A nurse knocked gently and asked if we needed anything. My mother forced a smile and said she just needed to step out to complete some paperwork. She told me she'd be right back. My father followed her without saying goodbye. I watched the door close. Minutes passed, then an hour, then another. The lights in the hallway dimmed, and different nurses came in and out. Every time footsteps approached, my heart jumped. Every time they passed, it sank a little more. By nightfall, the truth settled heavily in my chest. They weren't coming back. A nurse sat beside me and placed a warm hand on mine. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "we've been trying to reach your parents." I looked at her and finally understood. I nodded, even though my whole body was shaking. That night, alone in a hospital bed, I cried without making a sound. I wasn't just sick anymore. I was unwanted, abandoned not because I was bad, but because I was inconvenient. As the ceiling blurred above me, I made a quiet promise through my tears. If my parents could erase me from their lives so easily, I would one day become someone the world could never erase. The shelter became my new address, but it never felt like a home. It was a long, gray building where voices echoed and privacy didn't exist. I arrived with a single bag of hospital clothes and a file that explained my condition better than my parents ever had. No one asked me how I felt. They only asked how old I was and whether I could walk on my own. The first night was the hardest. I lay on a narrow bed, listening to strangers breathe, cry, and whisper in their sleep. I missed the sound of my mother moving around the kitchen in the early mornings. I missed my father's footsteps coming home in the evenings. Missing them hurt more than hating them ever could. School was my only escape. Inside classrooms, I could pretend I was normal. Books didn't ask where my parents were. Teachers didn't look at me with pity. They looked at my grades. I learned quickly that excellence was my safest shield. When I studied, the ache inside my chest went quiet. At 13, I stopped expecting visits. At 14, I stopped hoping for apologies. By 15, I stopped telling people I had parents at all. I worked small jobs after school, cleaning, tutoring, filing papers, anything that would give me independence. I learned how to survive without asking for help because asking reminded me of being left behind. Every paycheck, no matter how small, felt like proof that I still mattered. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if my parents ever thought of me. If my mother ever paused while folding laundry, or if my father ever felt guilt creep in during quiet moments. Those thoughts used to break me. Over time, they fueled me. When I turned 17, I tried to find them. I needed closure more than forgiveness. Standing outside our old house, I felt 13 again. But strangers lived there now. They told me my parents had sold the place years ago and moved on. Moved on. That word stayed with me. I returned to the shelter that night with swollen eyes but a clear mind. Whatever family I was searching for no longer existed. The people who raised me had chosen a life without me, and I had to choose a life without them too. From that moment on, I stopped looking backward. I poured everything into my future. Scholarships followed my grades. Recognition followed my discipline. Slowly, painfully, I built a life out of absence. I wasn't waiting to be chosen anymore. I was choosing myself. The auditorium felt unreal, like a dream I had stepped into by accident. Golden lights reflected off polished floors, and the air buzzed with quiet excitement. Families filled the seats, parents adjusting cameras, siblings whispering proudly. I sat alone in the front row, my hands folded in my lap, my heart steady in a way it had never been before. I didn't need anyone sitting beside me. The ceremony began with long speeches about perseverance and excellence. I listened, but my mind wandered to the 13-year-old girl who once lay alone in a hospital bed. She would never have believed she'd end up here. I almost smiled at the thought. That was when I noticed them. 3 rows behind me sat my parents. Time slowed. My breath caught. My mother looked older, her hair carefully styled, her clothes expensive. My father's posture was confident, familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. They were laughing softly, relaxed, proud, of something that had nothing to do with me. For a moment, I wondered who they were here to support. The dean stepped up to the podium, his voice strong and commanding. We now arrive at our highest academic honor of the year. He announced. The room fell silent. This award is given to a student whose journey reflects extraordinary resilience. My mother straightened in her seat. The recipient, the dean continued, entered our system without family support, without financial security, and without certainty of survival. My father frowned slightly, and yet, the dean said, she rose. I felt my heartbeat slow, each word wrapping around my past like a confession spoken out loud. Please welcome, the dean said clearly, Dr. Ayesha Rahman. For a split second the world stopped, my mother's face drained of color, her hands froze mid-clap. My father leaned forward, disbelief replacing confidence. I stood slowly, my legs steady, my head high. Applause thundered around me as I walked toward the stage. With every step, 13 years of silence echoed behind me. I passed my parents without looking at them, but I felt my mother's gaze burning into my back. On stage, the lights were blinding, but they couldn't erase the truth being spoken. The dean shook my hand and smiled proudly, an inspiration to us all. He said, abandoned at 13, self-made by 25. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I looked out at the audience and finally met my mother's eyes. She was crying, but I wasn't. That was the moment I understood the name they tried to forget had become the name they could never escape. The ceremony ended in waves of applause and scattered conversations, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat. I stepped down from the stage holding the award, its weight solid and real in my hands. For a moment, I considered leaving immediately. I had already said everything that mattered without speaking a word. But my past wasn't done with me yet. Ayesha, my mother's voice cracked behind me. I turned slowly. She stood a few steps away, her eyes red, her confidence gone. The woman who once left me in a hospital now looked afraid of me. My father hovered beside her, silent, uncertain, as if he didn't know what role he was allowed to play anymore. We thought you wouldn't remember us, my mother whispered. We thought you were too young. I met her gaze calmly. I remembered everything. I said, especially the waiting. My father cleared his throat. We did what we thought was best at the time. I nodded once, so did I. The words hung between us, heavy and undeniable. My mother reached out, then stopped herself, her hand trembling in the air. We didn't know you'd become this. she said, gesturing toward the award. I almost smiled. This, I replied softly, is who I became without you. Silence wrapped around us. People passed by, laughing, celebrating, unaware that a family was quietly breaking apart and being reborn in the same moment. I'm not angry anymore. I continued. Anger kept me alive for a while, but I outgrew it. Tears slid down my mother's cheeks. Can you forgive us? I took a breath. Forgiveness wasn't a door that opened all at once. It was a choice, slow and careful. I forgive you, I said honestly, but forgiveness doesn't mean access. My father looked down. You lost the right to know my life the day you left me behind. I added gently, tonight you only get to witness it. That was the revenge, not shouting, not revenge plots, just truth delivered calmly. I stepped past them and walked toward the exit. The night air outside was cool and freeing. I paused under the lights, looking at my reflection in the glass doors. I wasn't the abandoned girl anymore. I was the woman who survived abandonment. As I walked away, I didn't look back. Some chapters don't need closure, just distance.